Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Thomas. Thomas, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hey Tom. I'm Thomas. I'm the CEO of a data company called Unacast, and we help companies make better data-driven decisions by understanding how people move around on the planet. So typically, where do people go to stores, where they shop, where they dine, where they travel, where they work and live, and we help real estate companies and retailers avoid making decisions based on gut feel, but help them make decisions based on high quality and accurate data.
Okay, and whereabouts are you based, Thomas?
So I'm based outside of New York in Connecticut, but I'm originally from Oslo, Norway, and that's where I started my company, or Unicast, together with my co-founder about 8 years ago.
Okay, and what's that transition like from living in Oslo to living in Connecticut? I can't imagine that, you must at least have some bit of culture shock.
You know what? It's interesting, Tom, because yes, it was a culture shock. And it was a much bigger culture shock than I expected. So I wasn't prepared for it. And like when we took Unicast to the US, first I moved to New York with my family, my wife, my daughter was one. Unicast had like no products, no technology, no customers, no revenue,
Wow.
just like a bit of savings. I didn't know a single person in New York City, like not one person to call. It was a very surreal experience, but we knew that if you want to build this company, it had to be done in the biggest market, and that's the US. But I must say, I was so unprepared because Norway and the US, on the outside, it looks pretty similar. Like we are both Western countries, we are technology savvy, democracy, like all that. But working here, it is quite different. And I didn't prepare for that. I think if I would have moved Unicast to Japan, I would have prepared, right? I would have read all the books about Japanese business culture, like how to give your business card in the proper way, etc. But of course I didn't do that for the US because it seemed so close. But I learned very quickly that conducting business in the US and Norway is completely different. Norway has its pros and cons, the US has its pros and cons. But since our company has had a team in Norway ever since, and that's where our data science team is, and a commercial team in US, it's something that I've constantly trying to educate myself on, get better, like how do you bridge these two cultures when it comes to working, and like try to get the best of both.
And what are the main differences you've seen?
Like some of the kind of biggest difference, I think it has very much like how the society is built up between Norway and the US. Like Norway is a country where it's a small country. We're like 5 million people.
Sure.
We were lucky to find oil in the 1980s, and because of that, we are one of the richest countries in the world. That means that we have a very rich government and a welfare state, right? So if you get sick, if you lose your job, the government is there for you. They will pay for you. Pretty kind of unheard of here in the US, where it's more like every man and woman for himself or herself. I think that kind of changes a bit about how people are thinking from a Norwegian mentality, because whatever you do in Norway, it's very hard to get fired. And if you were to get fired, the government is there for you. So I've experienced that I need to kind of like help my team here in the US have that psychological safety. Like we are not a company that just kind of let people go without kind of a reason, right? Like that's not how we're building the company.
Good.
We also a company that doesn't punish people for doing mistakes. That happens all the time. So we've had engineers clicking the wrong button, spending $100,000 on a processing fee.
Wow.
Right? Those people were terrified they were going to lose their job. Of course, we have to learn from it, right? So I think I'm trying to kind of help my team here in the US understand that let's do mistakes. We learn from them. Let's go a bit outside our box. Like let's dare to take risk. And that's been like a journey. I think the people that have worked with me now for many years know that's the kind of leader I am. That's the culture I'm building. But people that come in, they don't see that in the first place. But then on the flip side, since Norway is a very protected country, right? And whatever happens, the government takes care of you. It's amazing. Here in the US, people are then more by themselves, which means that they need to also take care of themselves. And I'm seeing that creates a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? They want to kind of, they want to go big or go home. It's either or, right?
Okay.
So you get that kind of energy, the aspiration to build something truly big, build something market leading. And it's wonderful to like have those two cultures and like try to balance it and teach both sides of the Atlantic how to kind of take the best from both.
Yeah, and it's a much bigger market in the US as well, 5 million versus 320, 340 million in the US.
Yeah, and I think I always been of the principle that whatever you're doing, whatever company you are starting, if you're starting like a hot dog stand on the corner or if you're building a big data company, you're spending the same amount of time on your baby. Like you're spending as many awake hours as you can and want to do. And I want to be in that market where there's the most zeros in every cell in the Excel sheet. That's way more fun.
No doubt, no doubt. And you talked about a minute ago when we were starting up, you talked about the fact that Unacast is a data-driven intelligence company, I think was the expression you used. What do you mean by that?
So I mean that we understand how people move around on the planet by collecting multiple different data sources. And then we package those data sets. We have a big data science team in Norway into, for instance, insights such as migration pattern, right? Post-COVID, we have seen that people have been moving all across the US at an unprecedented rate. And we help then real estate developers understand, are people leaving New York? If they are, where do they move to? What parts of the US are seeing like increase in population? We also help retailers with site selection. So let's say you're going to open up a new store, you're expanding with 50 new locations. Where should you open up those stores in Austin, Texas? What part of the city will give the right foot traffic, the most foot traffic? And will you cannibalize existing stores you have? Will you steal from your competitors, etc.? And we are basically kind of doing this because, and this kind of still shocks me, that we're speaking to Fortune 500 companies, like stock listed companies that are making hundreds of $1 million investments and decisions just on gut feel. Just on, this is how it used to be.
All right.
They're making decisions based on stale data, like data that is several years old. And we know that post-pandemic, a lot of our behavior has changed. So the whole kind of mission that we are on is like, how can we help companies become more data-driven? How can we make them make the right decisions, but not just rooted in, this is how we did, or this is my gut feel. Like, let the data show. Let the data show what is the best locations for these new stores that you're opening.
So talk to me then about your data sources, because you're saying they're basing decisions sometimes on stale data or gut feel. How do we know that your data isn't stale?
Yeah, so we collect data from cell phones and telcos in the US and many other companies globally. So like privacy consented data that really fuels the aggregator product that we sell. But a good example, which actually comes across quite often, if there's a real estate developer team, right, and they're looking, and this is like a real example. We spoke to a client, they were looking to invest in a property in LA. And of course they can get all that. What's the rent in the area? What's the occupancy? Like all that kind of, that data is like very easily available. But they wanted to understand the neighborhood. Is this a vibrant neighborhood? Is it going up, going down? 4 executives flew to LA, rented a car, spent 3 days driving around on like just 3 random days, driving around, getting a feel of the neighborhood, right? Was this vibrant? Was a lot of people? Did they see people at the restaurants, coffee shop? That was a part of their decision making, right? And we told them, so you're flying out 3 days, looking, we have all this data. We can tell you how many people are in this particular neighborhood, at what time and day they are there. What's the demographic? Young people, older people? Are they tourists? Are they visitors? So it just shows that, and it just shows that we're in this like massive transformation now where we talk about a lot about the digital transformation, and that has been a topic for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 plus years. But we're also now in this data transformation, right? Where companies need to adopt data and they need to make their business decisions based on that.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you go a little bit deeper on the kinds of data that you can provide companies with? I mean, you mentioned a little bit there about the demographics, but I mean, how deep can you go with that without impacting on people's privacy?
Yeah, that's a balance, right? And there's two factors there, Tom. There's privacy and there's ethics.
Sure.
Privacy is pretty straightforward, right? You're either on the right side or the wrong side. When we started Unacast in 2015, there's two companies you don't want to start a data company in. It's Norway and it's Germany. It's the two countries in the world. Yeah, we kind of got to learn that the hard way with the strictest privacy laws.
Right.
And then Europe implemented GDPR in 2018, and US is still kind of somewhat behind, but it's catching up. There will be more privacy restrictions here, and it should. Ethics is more about what's the right use case for the data. So we kind of always balance this. How do we build these products that comply with both? But some of the kind of insights is it's kind of the core lies basically in what we call foot traffic data. So how many people are visiting a certain store? Like what's the count? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then you can kind of understand more, okay, if they visit this store, where do they come from? Like how far did they travel? And the interesting thing is that retailers today, they have a ton of data about who their customers are when they're inside the store. Like they know what aisles they're at and have cameras and sensors and everything. The second they leave the store, it's pretty like black.
Right.
They don't know. So the foot traffic, where they're coming from, but also understand what does the neighborhood look like? Is this a neighborhood in growth? Is this a neighborhood that is seeing more people? At what time and day? If this is an area with more people coming in the evening, okay, like that caters to a certain type of retailers or restaurants.
Sure.
So that's kind of like some of the core data sets that most of our clients are using for investment decisions, site selection, like retail operations, supply chain, and so on.
Okay, and where we're seeing now globally a large uptick in the use of AI. It's become the kind of topic du jour. Is this something that's impacting you as well? Are you starting to accelerate your technology based on this, or is it stuff for other people?
No, it's definitely not stuff for other people. But I think that you are right that there's all this like, what can generative AI do, right? And companies are having a hard time really finding what's the right application. Like, when does this benefit me? Like, yeah, doing a prompt into ChatGPT and get something back, it's useful, but does it really move the needle? But what we have discovered after speaking with a lot of our clients, and this is something that we've started to implement into our products, is what generative AI really can do is to bridge the gap between numbers and narratives. And what I mean by that is when we present our products, and when most kind of users look at a dashboard, right? Mm-hmm. They see graphs going up, graphs going down. There's another graph here. There's a third here, a plot chart, a pie chart. Like, it's kind of information overload. And what companies then need to have is an analyst. So you need to like an analyst that goes in and they interpret these graphs. And they try to like build a narrative, right? Like, what is this telling us? Is this telling us to invest in this area? Is this data telling us not to invest in this area? And this is where generative AI is absolutely superb, because generative AI is amazing at bridging that gap from data and building the narratives, like building the story, like telling what is the conclusion, what is the context of all these graphs that you are looking at. And that's something that we've been implementing in our products with great success, because what then happens is that our clients, they don't need a data analyst to spend hours and hours and hours interpreting data. They can kind of have the data available, they get the interpretation, and now this can be included into a PowerPoint to the executive team or to an investment memo, and they can spend time on what really matters, which is like making the decisions based on it. So I think that's where we have really found a ton of value using generative AI, like bridging from numbers to narratives, generative AI is amazing at compiling narratives.
True. Can you talk to any kind of customer success stories? Give us kind of practical use cases of the kind of location data and how it has helped customers.
Yeah, so we have, this actually came across this morning. Funnily enough, we had a company, all hands, we have a client that is doing real estate development. So they are, like their goal, right? They sit on a lot of real estate assets, retail buildings, and they want to rent those out. And the better kind of company they can get in, the higher rent that they can charge. But they need to sell. Like they need to sell to the Lululemons and sell to the Nikes and sell to the Taco Bells. Like what kind of retailer should fit here? And previously, they didn't have too much data to really express and advocate to the different brands why this location is perfect for you. This is why you should pay us this much because you will make much more. They were like struggling to come up with those arguments. But using our platform and our dashboard called Unacast Insights, they were able to quantify this. Again, back to the removal from the gut feel decisions over to the data-driven, removing from the we think this is good because there's a competitor here and a competitor there, but actually saying like, this is what the data shows. Your demographic is male between 20 to 35, this type of income, this type of education. X percentage of people that walk past in this area fits that demographic. And we see that the foot traffic is going like a certain trend, and you won't cannibalize your existing stores because they come from a different part of the town. I was pleased kind of to hear those stories, right? Because that is where it's tough for companies to kind of go from gut feel to data driven. It is a transformation, but when they do that, they see pretty impacting results.
Okay. And is it all real estate or are you in other segments as well?
Real estate, retail, and financial services is the three that we operate the most in. It's more about the use case, actually. It's more about making investment decisions. It's about doing site selection. It's about retail operations. Retail operation could, for instance, be like we have CPG brands that are licensing our data to understand where should they stock the stores with different inventory, depending on population migration, depending on neighborhood activity, depending on store traffic.
Okay, and again, going back to the kind of demographic information, can you also impute the income of people traveling in an area, gender, things beyond what you would normally just have access to?
Yeah, so this is the cool part. This is where you join different data sets together. And that's where the real power lies. And if other companies were to join data sets, it's very tough because it's basically plugging a square piece in a round hole. So that's what our data scientist team does, right? They kind of join this data set. So yeah, when you take the traffic data and you join that with demographic data, so to your point, like age, gender, income level, education. We also have psychographic data that we are using, which is like one level deeper. It tells you if you are a male 30 to 40, income X and education Y, there's many different types of those people, right? Like based on your interests.
Yep.
So we can layer in psychographic data. Like you might be one that loves outdoor living, right? Or you might be one that is more a computer specialist that likes to sit in front of your computer. We can go into those nuances as well. We can kind of layer on transaction data, right? So you can see like foot traffic and spend data. So is this and this is where I think the market is going now. You can't make decisions based on just one data set. Like you have to join many data sets together. And if you can kind of use generative AI to help bridge from the numbers to the narrative, you will provide a very compelling and very intuitive products to the clients.
Interesting. I'm curious as well. This is the Digital Supply Chain podcast, and supply chains are increasingly being evaluated not just on efficiency, but also on sustainability and their impact on the global community. How does our does location data play a role in promoting, more sustainable and community conscious supply chains?
Yeah, so I think that there's two examples we've seen there amongst our clients, which is post-COVID, as many people were moving out of cities into suburbs, there was a need to build more warehouses closer to where the people live, right?
Okay.
And that kind of basically helps take down the drive for the trucks and the delivery from the bigger warehouses out to where the consumer lives. So not only does it provide faster shipping and a better customer experience, but it also makes sure that the distance that cars and trucks and everything has to travel goes down. And the second part we also saw was with this trend in working from home now, or working locally, right? Working remotely. You can name this concept in many, many ways.
Yeah.
How do you prepare, especially the suburbs outside of the cities, for that change? Like, how do they become more environmentally friendly? Where are people traveling? At what time and day? Is there enough public transportation? So there are so many kind of use cases here that post-COVID, companies aren't yet kind of grasping up with them. It's only been 3-ish years. It's not that much when you talk about these long development cycles, but they're using this data now to how can they build a more sustainable city? How can they build a more sustainable community by understanding their people and understanding how they move around?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned COVID. I'm curious, have you seen changes in people's working patterns? The idea of, everyone went remote, or a lot of people went remote working from home. And now we're starting to see some companies push back and start to require their employees to come back to the office. So are you starting to see those changes take place?
We have. And I think we're all a bit colored by how the media presents this. If you read Wall Street Journal, New York Times, there are these headlines. People are back in the office. What we learn is that it is extremely locally. It is locally down to literally the county, to the city, to the town. So it is a very local phenomenon, and you can't just say the US is back to the office now. We also see that when those articles are written, there's incentive to sometimes promote that people are back to the office. Because when people are back to the office, it increases the real estate value of those buildings. It kind of gets people excited about, the city is vibrant again. We should start to build our coffee shops and restaurants, etc. We're actually seeing something different. We're seeing that the data we see now doesn't support how the media is presenting this. Wow. It is not as nice as it is. Yes, there's a growth back, but it's far, far from where we were prior to COVID. And I think we have forgot how that world looked like, especially when I go into New York City. I feel it's crowded now. I feel it's there's a lot of people there. But when I look at the data, there's far, far less people in New York City on a daily basis now than it were before COVID. So we kind of forgot how crowded a city like New York used to be.
Wow, fascinating. Really interesting. Cool. And where to next for Unacast? I mean, what do you see coming down the line 3, 4, 5 years from now?
So there's a few kind of themes that we talked about today. I think one is how do you expand the insights that you can provide with additional data sets, more context, provide a better understanding for your customers so they can make better decisions. While you started in retail and real estate and finance, this is the supply chain podcast. We have some clients there, right? I'm seeing us doing way more in that vertical in the coming years, as well as in insurance, there's a need for this. Local governments and civic, there's a need for this. So understanding human mobility, as we call it, it's important across so many use cases, across so many industries. As a startup, you have to focus, you have to take one use case, one vertical at a time. But that's kind of the company that we're aspiring to build.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because I remember, I think it was Orange, the telecom company, ran a hackathon this is back around 2013, 2014, in West Africa, where they put out 6 months worth of the data of their users and said, okay, take this data and come up with the best use of it.
Yeah.
And the winner of the hackathon was a company which looked at and compared the public transportation routes versus the routes that people were actually taking to work, and then mapped one onto the other and said, these don't match, so you should change the public transportation routes to more closely match where people are actually going. So, it's fascinating, all the different kinds of use cases there are for that data.
It is. And actually on that topic, we actually help many of the world's largest telcos in processing their own location data and build exactly what you said. So we work with a company called Telia in the Nordics. Mm-hmm. We work with British Telecom in UK, and these telcos, right, they are struggling to find new revenue streams because the price for data and voice, it's going down. And they all try to put in what is called value-added services like Netflix and insurance and things that aren't core to them, but they're desperate in growing revenue. And what they realize now is that they sit on a gold mine. Telcos sit on decades of cell tower data, which has a lot of insights, but the telcos lack that competence and the technology to turn those raw cell tower signals into meaningful insights. Yeah. So that's actually a big part of our business, to also license out our technology and help BT understanding exactly the use case that you said, transportation, understand the commuting rails, etc. So yeah, this is a marketing massive growth and massive changes in the next couple of years. So it's a very cool space to be a part of, and I didn't know it was going to be this exciting, this fun, this challenging when I moved to New York 8 years ago without knowing anyone in the city.
Coming back to that, any regrets about moving to New York?
No. I'm actually no, it was definitely the right decision. We really enjoy living here in the US. I went to school in California and I lived in Boston, so I always had this very close connection to the US. And one of the reasons why we did move to the US was prior to building Unacast, my co-founder KJ and I, we were a part of the early team that built Tidal, the music streaming service.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like a competitor to Spotify, which most have heard of. Mm-hmm. We ended up selling the company to Jay-Z and Beyonce. But we did kind of one mistake back then, or we just didn't even think about it. So Spotify started out of Sweden, Tidal started out of Norway. Right. And Tidal, we took Norway, we took Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Poland, very kind of comforting, very kind of locally, market by market. Spotify, boom, they took US very early on. So when my co-founder KJ and I, we decided to start Unacast, I remember very vividly we had this conversation about, we're not going to make that mistake again. We're going to move to the market that is the biggest first. And if you can't make it there, okay, this company doesn't exist. So that was one of the big motivations for moving to the US. And yeah, we haven't looked back since. It was definitely the right decision.
Brilliant. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Thomas. Is there any question that I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
I think it's more like as companies are getting more acclimatized to the digital transformation, as we talked about, how are companies thinking about the data transformation that they have to go through? It hasn't gotten that much buzz in the media or in the press yet, but with more data companies coming alive and with more data science capabilities, with more compute power, with more generative AI, is this perfect storm that is building up now to democratize these data sets as very easily accessible and digestible insights for company to make better decisions. And that's the development, and that's kind of what I encourage all the companies that I speak to. How are you going about it? What is your plan? Have you thought through how you can be a part of it and not be a laggard? And if we can help them on that journey, we were grateful to do so.
Cool. Great. Good to know. Good to know. Thomas, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we talked about in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
So if they want to learn more about Unicast and the data that we provide, they can go to unicast.com. And we have a bunch of use cases and white papers and really kind of explaining how companies can take advantage of the data. And if you want to reach out to me directly, just find me on LinkedIn, Thomas Walle. Last name is Walle. It'll probably be in the podcast as well, so they'll find it.
Perfect. Thomas, it's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Wonderful. Awesome being here, Tom.